The rain had started at dusk, and by the time Lady Beatrice Ashford arrived at Blackwood Manor, it was a torrent. The ancient estate loomed against the darkening sky, its countless windows glowing with candlelight that seemed to pulse with secrets. She stood in the entrance hall, water dripping from the hem of her midnight blue gown, her heart hammering beneath her corset as she realized what she had come here to do. The marble floor gleamed like black ice beneath her slippers, and the enormous crystal chandelier overhead cast fractured light across the portraits of stern-faced Blackwood ancestors who seemed to judge her even now. She had not been invited. The Duke of Blackwood, Edmund Blackwood, the most powerful man in 3 counties, did not know she was here. His wife, the Duchess Catherine, certainly did not expect her. And yet Beatrice had traveled through the storm alone, without chaperone or companion, driven by something she could not quite name. Knowledge, perhaps, or duty, or the dangerous pull she had felt toward the Duke ever since that night at the Pembroke Ball 6 months ago, when he had looked at her across a crowded ballroom as if she were the only person who existed. "Miss Ashford." The voice came from the shadows at the top of the grand staircase, cold and smooth as polished steel. "This is unexpected." Beatrice's breath caught. The Duke descended the stairs with the measured grace of a predator, his tall frame clothed entirely in black, save for the white of his shirt collar. His dark hair was slightly disheveled, as if he had been running his hands through it, and his gray eyes, those infamous eyes that could freeze a man's blood or ignite a woman's desire, fixed upon her with an intensity that made her want to flee and step closer all at once. "Your Grace," she managed, dropping into a curtsy that felt absurdly formal given the circumstances. "I apologize for the intrusion. I would not have come if it were not urgent." He reached the bottom of the stairs and stood before her, close enough that she could smell the faint scent of tobacco and sandalwood that clung to him. His expression remained unreadable, that mask of aristocratic indifference he wore so perfectly. But something flickered in his eyes, curiosity perhaps, or annoyance at this disruption to his evening. "Urgent," he repeated, his voice carrying that particular inflection that suggested he doubted very much that anything in her world could be truly urgent. "I was not aware we had business to discuss, Miss Ashford." The rain hammered against the windows, filling the silence between them. Beatrice felt her resolve waver. What was she doing here? She barely knew this man, had spoken to him only twice before tonight. Once at that ball, where he had asked her to dance and held her perhaps a moment too long, his hand burning through her glove. And once at a garden party, where they had found themselves alone on a terrace, and he had looked at her with such naked hunger that she had fled like a frightened rabbit. But she had seen what she had seen, and someone had to tell him. "It concerns the Duchess," she said quietly, meeting his gaze despite every instinct that told her to look away. "Your wife." The change in him was subtle but unmistakable. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, and something dangerous flashed in his eyes, a darkness that made Beatrice wonder if she had made a terrible mistake in coming here. He stepped even closer, invading the space between them until she could feel the heat radiating from his body. "Choose your next words very carefully, Miss Ashford," he said softly, and there was a threat woven through that silky tone that made her skin prickle with fear and something else entirely. "I do not take kindly to gossip, particularly when it concerns my wife." "It is not gossip, Your Grace." Beatrice's voice was steadier than she felt. "I was at Lady Thornton's house this afternoon. I was leaving through the garden. I had forgotten my shawl and returned for it, and I overheard a conversation between the Duchess and Lord Hadley." She watched his face, saw the way his expression didn't change even as his entire body seemed to go very still. Lord Hadley. Everyone in their circle knew Lord Hadley, charming, handsome, perpetually in debt. The kind of man who traded on his looks and his title, who danced attendance on wealthy married women and was always just a breath away from scandal. "What did you hear?" The Duke's voice had gone even quieter, which somehow made it more frightening. Beatrice drew in a shaking breath. "They were planning to meet. Tonight. Here, in your own home, while you were meant to be at your club. She said—" Her voice faltered, but she forced herself to continue. "She said you would never know, that you spent your evenings in town and paid her no mind, and that she might as well enjoy herself while you enjoyed your other pursuits." The words hung between them like poison. The Duke's face remained that perfect mask, but Beatrice could see the fury building behind his eyes, cold and implacable as winter ice. He did not rage or shout. He simply looked at her with those terrible gray eyes and said, in a voice like silk over steel, "They are coming tonight." It was not a question. "Yes," Beatrice whispered. "She said midnight, that you would not return until dawn." For a long moment, the Duke said nothing. He turned away from her, walking to the tall windows that overlooked the rain-drenched grounds. His reflection in the glass was ghostly, a specter of aristocratic rage barely contained. Beatrice stood frozen, uncertain whether she should flee or stay, whether she had done the right thing or committed some unforgivable breach. "Why did you tell me?" he asked finally, still staring out at the storm. "You could have said nothing. Let me remain in ignorance. It would have been safer for you." Beatrice struggled to find the words. "I could not let it happen. I could not let them make a fool of you in your own home. You deserve to know the truth." He turned to look at her then, and the expression on his face made her breath catch. It was not gratitude. It was something far more complex, a mixture of fury and approval and something darker that she could not name. He moved toward her with that same predatory grace, and before she could step back, he caught her chin in his hand, tilting her face up to meet his gaze. "Do you know what you have done, Beatrice Ashford?" he murmured, using her given name for the first time, making it sound like a caress and a curse all at once. "You have given me a gift, a terrible, perfect gift, and now you will stay and witness what I do with it." "Your Grace, you will stay," he said, and it was not a request. "You will take dinner in the blue drawing room. You will be comfortable, and when midnight comes, you will see exactly what happens when someone betrays the Duke of Blackwood." Before she could protest, he released her and moved to the bell pull, summoning his butler with 2 sharp tugs. The elderly man appeared almost instantly, his expression carefully neutral as he took in the sight of the disheveled young woman standing in his master's entrance hall. "Grimsby," the Duke said pleasantly, as if this were an ordinary social call. "Miss Ashford will be staying the evening. Please have Mrs. Hartwell prepare the blue drawing room and send up a tray. Miss Ashford has had a difficult journey in the rain and requires rest and refreshment." "Of course, Your Grace." The butler's gaze flickered to Beatrice for just a moment, and she thought she saw a flash of sympathy there. "Shall I inform Her Grace of Miss Ashford's arrival?" "That will not be necessary," the Duke said, and there was something in his tone that made even the unflappable Grimsby pale slightly. "The Duchess is not to be disturbed. She is preparing for evening visitors." The emphasis on those last words was subtle but unmistakable. Grimsby bowed and disappeared, and Beatrice found herself alone again with the Duke, who was watching her with that unreadable expression that made her feel simultaneously like prey and something infinitely more precious. "I have preparations to make," he said quietly. "Grimsby will see you settled. Rest, if you can. And Beatrice?" He paused, and when he spoke again, His voice was soft as a blade through silk. "Thank you. What you did tonight took courage. Foolish, reckless courage, perhaps. But courage nonetheless. I will not forget it." Then he was gone, vanishing up the staircase like a shadow, leaving Beatrice trembling in the entrance hall, with rain still dripping from her gown and the terrible certainty that she had set something in motion that couldn't be stopped. The blue drawing room was exquisite, all velvet and gilt, and carefully chosen artwork that spoke of old money and older power. A fire had been lit in the massive hearth, and someone, Mrs. Hartwell, presumably, had left out a tray with cold chicken, cheese, bread, and a bottle of very fine wine. Beatrice tried to eat, but the food turned to ash in her mouth. She kept seeing the Duke's face when she told him about his wife's betrayal, that terrible cold fury that suggested he was capable of anything. What had she done? She rose and paced the room, her still damp gown leaving a trail across the carpet. Through the tall windows, she could see the rain continuing its assault on the manor, turning the gardens into a landscape of shadows and gleaming wet stone. Somewhere in this house, the Duchess was preparing for her lover's arrival, oblivious to the trap that was being set. And somewhere else, the Duke was, what? Planning? Plotting? Preparing his revenge? Beatrice had always thought of herself as sensible, practical, bound by the same rigid rules of propriety that governed every woman of her class. She attended balls and dinner parties. She smiled and made polite conversation. She never spoke too loudly or laughed too freely. She had been raised to be decorative and silent, a perfect vessel for some man's ambitions. But Edmund Blackwood had looked at her at that ball 6 months ago, and something inside her had cracked open. He was everything the matrons whispered about when they thought young ladies weren't listening. Dangerous, powerful, with a reputation for cold ruthlessness in business and politics. They said he had married Catherine Fairfax for her family's connections and her considerable dowry, that the marriage was one of convenience rather than affection. They said he kept a mistress in London, a beautiful actress, who wore the jewels he gave her to the theater. Beatrice had never believed in love at first sight. She still didn't. But she believed in recognition, the sense that she had looked into someone's eyes and seen something that called to the hidden parts of herself. When the Duke had held her during that waltz, when his hand had pressed against the small of her back and his breath had stirred the curls at her temple, she had felt alive in a way she never had before. And then he had released her and turned to his wife, had offered Catherine his arm with perfect courtesy, and Beatrice had understood that whatever she had felt, whatever she thought she had seen in his eyes, meant nothing. He was married. She was nobody. End of story. Except it wasn't the end, because she had heard Catherine and Lord Hadley plotting in Lady Thornton's garden, had heard the Duchess laugh about her husband's indifference, had heard the casual cruelty with which she spoke of the man who had given her his name and his protection. And Beatrice had realized that she could not, would not, let it stand. The clock on the mantel showed 11:30. 30 minutes until midnight. 30 minutes until Lord Hadley arrived for his assignation. 30 minutes until the Duke enacted whatever revenge he had planned. Beatrice should leave. She should summon a carriage, brave the storm, return to her modest townhouse in London, and pretend this night had never happened. But even as she thought it, she knew she would stay. The Duke had commanded it, yes, but more than that, some dark curiosity had taken root in her chest. She needed to see what would happen. She needed to witness the consequences of the truth she had delivered. The door to the drawing room opened without warning, and Beatrice spun around to find the Duke standing there, changed now into evening dress of such perfect formality it looked like armor. His white shirt gleamed in the firelight. His black coat fit him like a second skin. And his face, oh, his face was the coldest thing she had ever seen. "Come with me," he said, extending his hand. "It is nearly time." "Your Grace, I don't think—" "I said come." His voice was gentle, implacable. "You brought me this information, Beatrice. You set this in motion. You will see it through." She wanted to refuse. Every rule of propriety she had ever learned screamed at her to refuse. But she found herself crossing the room, found herself placing her hand in his. His fingers closed around hers, warm and strong, and he drew her out into the corridor. They moved through the silent house like ghosts, the Duke leading her through passages she had never seen, up a narrow servant's stair until they reached a small gallery that overlooked the Duchess's private sitting room. The gallery was clearly meant for musicians to play during large gatherings, but tonight it was empty, save for 2 chairs positioned to provide a perfect view of the room below. The sitting room was a vision of feminine luxury. Pale pink walls, delicate furniture, vases of hothouse roses that must have cost a fortune in this season. And there, reclining on a chaise lounge in a gown of shimmering emerald silk that left very little to the imagination, was the Duchess Catherine. She was beautiful. Beatrice had always known that, but seeing her now, arranged like a courtesan awaiting her lover, she understood for the first time why the Duke had married her. Catherine had golden hair that fell in artful curls around her shoulders, blue eyes that sparkled with mischief, a figure that the finest modistas in Paris could only enhance, never improve. She was everything Beatrice was not: confident, sensual, perfectly at ease in her own skin. The Duke guided Beatrice to one of the chairs and stood behind her, one hand resting on the back of her seat. She could feel the heat of his body, could hear the measured rhythm of his breathing. He was perfectly still, perfectly controlled, but she sensed the fury coiled beneath that icy exterior. "Watch," he murmured, his breath stirring her hair, "and learn what happens to those who betray me." The clock below struck midnight, each chime echoing through the silent house. On the 12th stroke, there was a soft knock at the sitting-room door, and Catherine rose from the chaise with a smile that was pure seduction. "Come in," she called, her voice low and inviting. The door opened, and Lord Hadley entered. He was handsome in the obvious way of men who traded on their looks, golden-haired, blue-eyed, with the kind of easy charm that concealed a fundamental emptiness. He crossed to Catherine immediately, pulling her into his arms without preamble, and Beatrice had to look away from the kiss they shared. "I was afraid you wouldn't come," Catherine breathed when they finally parted. "Edmund is at his club, but still—" "Your husband is a fool," Hadley said, running his hands down her back in a way that made Beatrice's stomach turn. "If you were mine, I would never let you out of my sight." Catherine laughed, that bright artificial laugh that society ladies perfected in the schoolroom. "If I were yours, darling, we would starve. Edmund's money is the only thing that makes this tolerable. But at least when he's occupied with his little actress, I can enjoy myself." Beside Beatrice, the Duke went very still. She risked a glance up at him and saw that his face had gone absolutely expressionless, the look of a man who had locked every emotion behind walls of ice. Below, Hadley was kissing Catherine's throat, murmuring endearments that would have made a streetwalker blush. Catherine arched against him, her hands fumbling with his coat, and Beatrice felt a wave of mortification wash over her. She should not be here. She should not be witnessing this. But the Duke's hand settled on her shoulder, keeping her in place, and she understood that he needed a witness, needed someone to see his humiliation and his rage. "Catherine." The Duke's voice rang out clear and cold, echoing through the sitting room, like the voice of God on Judgment Day. The effect was instantaneous. Catherine and Hadley sprang apart as if burned, their faces draining of color. Catherine's hands flew to her mouth, her eyes wide with shock and horror, as she stared up at the gallery, where the Duke stood looking down at them. "Edmund," she gasped, "this isn't—" "Do not insult my intelligence further," the Duke said, and his voice was so cold that Beatrice shivered, despite the warmth of the room. "I can see perfectly well what this is." He moved then, descending from the gallery with terrifying calm, Beatrice following, because she could not seem to make herself stay behind. By the time they reached the sitting room, Hadley had backed up against the wall, looking very much like he wanted to disappear into it, and Catherine had sunk onto the chaise, her beautiful face crumpling. "Your Grace," Hadley stammered, "I can explain." "Can you?" The Duke turned those gray eyes on the younger man, and Beatrice saw Hadley actually flinch. "By all means, Lord Hadley. Explain to me what you were doing with your hands on my wife at midnight in her private chambers. I confess myself most curious to hear your reasoning." Hadley's charm had, deserted him entirely. He looked young suddenly and terrified. "Your Grace, I never meant— it was a mistake." "A mistake," the Duke repeated softly. "How unfortunate. For you." He moved closer to Hadley, and though he made no threatening gesture, the younger man pressed himself harder against the wall. "You will leave my house immediately. You will leave London. In fact, I think it would be wise for you to leave England entirely. I have friends everywhere, Lord Hadley. Friends who would be most interested to learn of your indiscretions. Friends who might choose to call in your gambling debts. Friends who might mention to your creditors that you are not, perhaps, the safest investment." Hadley's face had gone from pale to green. "You can't. I can," the Duke said, and smiled. It was the most terrifying expression Beatrice had ever seen. "I can, and I will. Unless you would prefer to meet me at dawn? I believe I still have my father's dueling pistols somewhere. I would be happy to give you that option instead." "No!" Hadley practically ran for the door, his dignity in tatters. "I'm leaving. I'm gone. You'll never see me again, Your Grace. I swear it." "See that I don't," the Duke said pleasantly. "And Lord Hadley, if I hear that you have spoken of this night to anyone at all, I will destroy you so completely that your family name will become a cautionary tale. Do we understand each other?" Hadley fled. They could hear his footsteps echoing through the house, hear the slam of the front door, and then there was only silence. The Duke turned to his wife, who was crying now, mascara running down her cheeks in black rivers. "Edmund, please," she sobbed. "Please, I'm sorry. It was a moment of madness. It meant nothing." "It meant nothing," he repeated, his voice absolutely devoid of emotion. "How reassuring. Tell me, Catherine, how long has this particular nothing been going on? Weeks? Months?" She hiccuped, reaching for him, but he stepped back as if her touch would contaminate him. "A few months. Edmund, you must understand. You're never here. You're always with that actress. Do not," he said, and the word cracked like a whip, "attempt to justify your betrayal with my supposed sins. Yes, I have a mistress. I have never denied it. I have also never promised you fidelity. That was not part of our arrangement. But you, Catherine, you took vows. You promised me loyalty, discretion, and respect. You have given me none of those things." He began to pace, his hands clasped behind his back, and Beatrice realized he was working through his rage methodically, containing it before it consumed him. "I could divorce you," he said conversationally. "It would be scandalous, certainly. Difficult. But I have the money and the influence to weather it. You, on the other hand, would be ruined, cast out of society. Your family would disown you. You would have nothing. Catherine's sobs grew louder, more desperate. Please, Edmund, please don't. I'll do anything. Anything, he mused, stopping to look at her with those cold gray eyes. Will you? Then here is what you will do, my dear wife. You will remain here at Blackwood Manor. You will not return to London. You will not attend balls or dinners or any social events unless I explicitly permit it. You will live quietly, modestly, as befits a woman who has disgraced herself. And you will pray that I do not decide divorce is worth the scandal after all. You're going to lock me away. Catherine's tears had stopped, replaced by dawning horror. Edmund, you can't. I'll go mad here alone. You should have thought of that before you brought your lover into my home, he said flatly. Be grateful I'm not doing worse. In another century, they would have put you in a convent. Consider this your convent, Catherine. You will have servants. You will have comfort. But you will not have freedom. Not anymore. He turned away from her as if she had ceased to exist, his gaze finding Beatrice where she stood, frozen near the doorway. Something flickered in his eyes, an acknowledgement perhaps, or an apology for making her witness this ugliness. Miss Ashford, he said quietly, I believe it is time you retired. Grimsby will show you to a guest chamber. The rain has not let up, and I cannot, in good conscience, send you out into the storm tonight. You will stay here until morning. It was not a request, and Beatrice found she had no desire to argue. She curtsied, to him, not to the weeping Duchess, and fled the room, her heart pounding and her mind reeling from what she had witnessed. True to the Duke's word, Grimsby appeared almost immediately, his face carefully blank as he led her through the house to a beautiful guest chamber decorated in cream and gold. A fire had been lit, and someone had laid out a nightgown that must belong to one of the housemaids, simple white cotton, but clean and warm. Will you require anything else, miss? Grimsby asked gently. No, Beatrice whispered. Thank you. When he was gone, she sank onto the bed and let herself shake. She had done this. She had set this revenge in motion. The Duke had destroyed Lord Hadley's prospects, had locked his wife away like a prisoner in a fairy tale, and all because Beatrice had chosen to tell him the truth. She should feel guilty. She should feel horrified. But as she lay in the dark, listening to the rain, all she felt was a strange, terrible satisfaction. The Duchess had mocked her husband, had treated his name and his home with contempt, and she had been punished for it. Lord Hadley had taken advantage of the Duke's trust, and he had been driven away in disgrace. And Beatrice had been the instrument of that justice. She did not sleep. How could she, when her blood was singing with the intoxication of what she had done? She had never felt powerful before, had never felt like her actions mattered. But tonight, she had changed the course of lives, had seen the most powerful man in 3 counties look at her with something that might have been respect. Dawn came slowly, gray light filtering through the curtains. Beatrice rose and dressed in her gown from the night before, now dry but hopelessly wrinkled. She made her way downstairs, following the sound of footsteps and voices, and found herself in a small breakfast room, where the Duke sat alone with his coffee and his newspaper. He looked up when she entered, and for a moment neither of them spoke. In the morning light, she could see the exhaustion in his face, the fine lines around his eyes that suggested he had not slept either. Sit, he said finally, gesturing to the chair across from him. Grimsby will bring more coffee. She sat, her hands folded in her lap, acutely aware of how inappropriate this was. A young unmarried woman, alone with a married man in his home, having breakfast together, as if they were intimate friends. The scandal, if anyone knew, would be enormous. "I have arranged for a carriage to take you back to London," the Duke said, setting down his paper. "It will be discreet. No one need know you are here." "Thank you," Beatrice said quietly. "Do not thank me." His voice was sharp. "I have used you poorly, Beatrice. I should not have made you witness what happened last night. That was cruel of me." "You were hurt," she said before she could stop herself. "You wanted someone to see what she had done to you." His eyes met hers, and she saw surprise there, quickly masked. "Perceptive," he murmured. "Yes, I wanted a witness. I wanted someone to see that I am not the cold, indifferent husband Catherine described to her lover, that I am capable of rage and pain and the need for revenge." "I saw," Beatrice whispered. "Yes." He was silent for a moment, studying her face. "Tell me something, Beatrice Ashford. Why did you really come here last night? You could have written a note, sent a messenger. You did not have to travel through a storm alone to deliver your warning in person." The question hung between them, dangerous and charged. Beatrice knew she should lie, should make some excuse about duty or propriety, but she found herself speaking the truth instead. "Because I wanted to," she said simply. "Because when I heard her mocking you, I felt such rage, and I wanted to see your face when you learned the truth. I wanted—" She trailed off, unable to finish. "You wanted what?" His voice had gone very soft. "I wanted you to see me," she confessed, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. "I wanted you to know that someone cared enough to warn you, that someone thought you deserved better than what she was giving you." The silence that followed was absolute. The Duke set down his coffee cup very carefully, his movements deliberate, and when he spoke, his voice was rough with an emotion she could not name. "Do you have any idea what you have done?" he asked. "Coming here, telling me, staying to witness my revenge. You have made yourself complicit in this, Beatrice. You have bound yourself to me in a way that cannot easily be undone." "I know," she said, and realized it was true. She did know. She had known from the moment she stepped into Blackwood Manor that she was choosing a path that would change everything. The Duke rose from his chair and moved around the table, standing over her in a way that should have been intimidating, but felt like something else entirely. "I should send you away," he said quietly. "I should ensure we never see each other again. It would be the honorable thing to do." "Yes," Beatrice agreed, her heart hammering. "It would." "But I find," he continued, reaching down to tilt her face up to meet his gaze, "that I am not feeling particularly honorable this morning. I find that I am feeling possessive and territorial and deeply, dangerously grateful to you for what you have given me." His thumb brushed across her cheek, and Beatrice felt her breath catch. "I am married," he said, as if reminding himself as much as her. "Trapped in a union that is now nothing but a cage for both myself and my wife. I cannot offer you marriage. I cannot even offer you public acknowledgement. All I can offer you is shadows and secrets and the kind of liaison that would ruin you if it were discovered." "I know," Beatrice whispered again, "and yet you're not running away." It was not a question. "No," she said, "I'm not." He made a sound that might have been a laugh or a curse, and then he was pulling her to her feet, his hands framing her face as he looked at her with an intensity that stole her breath. "This is madness," he said. "You are young, innocent. You should want nothing to do with a man like me." "But I do," she said simply. "I want everything to do with you. I have since that night at the Pembroke ball, when you looked at me, and I saw past all the coldness and control to the man beneath." "There is no man beneath," he said harshly. "Only more coldness, more control. I am not kind, Beatrice. I am not gentle. I am a man who locks his wife away for betraying him, who threatens and manipulates and destroys anyone who crosses him. That is who I am. I know, she said for the third time, and I am choosing you anyway. For a moment, she thought he might push her away, might send her to the carriage and out of his life forever. But then something in him seemed to break, and he was kissing her with a hunger that was nothing like the controlled, proper kiss she had imagined. This was possession and claim, and the unleashing of months of restrained desire. She had never been kissed before, had never been touched like this, with hands that demanded and took and offered nothing gentle. But she found herself responding with equal fervor, her fingers tangling in his dark hair, her body pressing against his, as if she could merge them into one being. When he finally pulled back, they were both breathing hard, and his eyes had gone almost black with desire. "If we do this," he said, roughly, "if we begin this, Beatrice, I will not let you go easily. I am a possessive man, a jealous man. I will want all of you, your time, your attention, your body, your secrets. I will want you to be mine in every way that matters, even if the law and society say you cannot be." "Then take me," she said, reckless and certain. "Make me yours. I don't care about the consequences." "You will," he said. But he was already pulling her toward him again, already claiming her mouth in another searing kiss. "You will care when the scandal breaks, when society turns its back on you, when you realize what you have sacrificed for a man who can give you nothing but shadows." "Edmund," she said, using his name for the first time, feeling the intimacy of it on her tongue. "Stop talking and kiss me again." He did, with a groan that sounded like surrender and triumph all at once. And as Beatrice gave herself over to the heat of his touch, she understood that she had set more than one revenge in motion last night. She had set herself on a path that would lead to ruin or redemption, scandal or secret joy. The Duke's wife had betrayed him, and he had punished her with imprisonment and isolation. But Beatrice had given him the means for that revenge, and in return, he was giving her something Catherine had never valued: his attention, his desire, his fierce and undivided focus. It was not love. Neither of them was fool enough to call it that. But it was power, exchanged between them like a dark gift. She had given him the truth, and he was giving her himself. The rain had stopped by the time the Duke finally released her, both of them disheveled and breathing hard. He straightened her gown with hands that were surprisingly gentle, smoothed her hair, made her presentable again even as his eyes promised future disorder. "You will return to London," he said, his voice rough. "You will carry on with your life as before. But I will send for you. Soon. And when I do, you will come to me." "Yes," Beatrice said simply. "This is not a request, Beatrice. This is what we are now. You have made yourself mine with your actions last night, and I am not a man who relinquishes what is his." She should have been frightened by the possessiveness in his tone, by the absolute certainty with which he claimed her. But instead she felt a rush of dark joy, a sense of rightness that defied all logic. "I am yours," she agreed, "and you, Edmund Blackwood, are mine. Catherine may have your name and your ring, but I have you." His smile was sharp and dangerous, and entirely beautiful. "Yes," he said, "you do." The carriage ride back to London passed in a blur. Beatrice sat in the plush interior of the Duke's carriage, her fingers pressed to her lips, where she could still feel the phantom heat of his kisses. She should be horrified at what she had done. She had become the other woman, the mistress, the kind of person society would revile if they knew. But she felt no shame, only a fierce, consuming satisfaction. The weeks that followed were a study in restraint. True to his word, The Duke sent for her. Not immediately. He was too clever for that. But a week after her visit to Blackwood Manor, a note arrived at her townhouse, delivered by a discreet footman who waited for no reply. Thursday, 3 o'clock, the house on Curzon Street. No signature, but she knew his handwriting by now. That bold, decisive script. She went, of course. The house on Curzon Street proved to be a small, elegant townhouse, tucked away from prying eyes. A butler admitted her without question, as if young ladies arrived alone at gentlemen's residences every day, and showed her to a drawing room where the Duke waited. He did not greet her with words. Instead, he crossed the room in 3 long strides and pulled her into his arms, kissing her with a hunger that suggested the week had been as difficult for him as it had been for her. She responded with equal fervor, her hands roaming over the fine fabric of his coat, relearning the solid strength of his body. "I have thought of nothing but you," he said against her throat, his voice hoarse. "You have bewitched me, Beatrice Ashford. I cannot concentrate on my business. I cannot sleep. All I can think about is the taste of your mouth and the way you looked at me when you said you were mine." "Good," she said, tilting her head to give him better access. "I'm glad I'm not suffering alone." He laughed. The sound startled out of him, and she realized with a shock that she had never heard him laugh before. It transformed his face, made him look younger, less guarded. "Suffering," he repeated. "Yes, that is the word for it. Sweet suffering." They spent the afternoon in that house, talking and touching and learning each other in ways that were both innocent and profoundly intimate. He told her about his childhood, about the cold father who had taught him that emotion was weakness, and the mother who had died when he was 10, leaving him alone in Blackwood Manor with only servants for company. She told him about her own family. Her father dead of fever when she was 15. Her mother remarried to a merchant and living in Bath, leaving Beatrice to make her own way in London on a small inheritance. "We're both alone," he said quietly, his fingers tracing patterns on her palm. "Both outsiders in our own ways. Perhaps that is why we understand each other. Or perhaps," Beatrice suggested, "we are simply 2 people who refuse to be bound by society's expectations of who we should be." "A dangerous philosophy," he murmured, "but I find I rather like it." Their affair, for that was what it was, despite the care they took to keep it secret, became the center of Beatrice's existence. She lived for the coded notes that arrived at irregular intervals, summoning her to the house on Curzon Street. She learned to read the subtle signals he gave at social events when they encountered each other. A particular tilt of his head, that meant he wanted to see her. A certain tone in his voice that suggested he was thinking of their last encounter. Society saw nothing. They were too well bred, too controlled. The Duke remained the cold, powerful figure he had always been, and Beatrice was just another unremarkable young woman, attending the season's endless round of balls and dinners. No one suspected that beneath the surface of propriety, they were conducting a passionate liaison that would have scandalized the very foundations of the ton. But Beatrice was learning that revenge, once tasted, was a difficult appetite to satisfy. The Duke's treatment of his wife had been just the beginning. Catherine remained imprisoned at Blackwood Manor, but the Duke was not content to simply lock her away and forget about her. He began a systematic campaign to ensure that everyone in society knew of her disgrace without ever stating it explicitly. He attended every event alone, making it clear through his very presence that the Duchess was not welcome. He cut her friends from his social circle, subtly making it known that anyone who associated with Catherine would find themselves excluded from his considerable influence. He controlled her money, her movements, every aspect of her life with an iron grip that left her with nothing but the luxury of her prison. And Beatrice, God help her, found satisfaction in watching Catherine's slow destruction. Every time she heard whispers about the Duchess's mysterious absence from society, every time she saw the Duke's cold smile when someone asked after his wife, she felt a dark thrill of vindication. "Does it trouble you?" the Duke asked her one afternoon, as they lay together on the settee in the Curzon Street drawing room, her head on his chest, his fingers running through her unbound hair. "What I have done to Catherine?" Beatrice considered the question carefully. "It troubles me that I don't feel more troubled," she admitted. "She wronged you. She deserves to face consequences. But the severity of those consequences, sometimes I wonder if we have become cruel. He shifted so he could look down at her, his gray eyes intent. "This is my revenge, Beatrice. My cruelty. You bear no responsibility for it. Don't I?" She met his gaze steadily. "I was the one who told you. I was the one who set all of this in motion. And I would do it again in a heartbeat. Does that make me cruel too?" He was silent for a long moment, his hand stilling in her hair. "Perhaps," he said finally. "Or perhaps it makes you honest. Most people would pretend to regret their actions, while secretly savoring the results. You, at least, have the courage to acknowledge the darkness in your own heart." "Is there darkness in my heart?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. "Yes," he said simply, "as there is in mine. We are well matched in that, if nothing else." The months passed, and their affair deepened into something that neither of them wanted to name, but both felt acutely. Beatrice found herself thinking of him constantly, analyzing every word he spoke, every gesture he made. She memorized the shape of his hands, the way his voice dropped when he was aroused, the rare occasions when his guard slipped, and she saw the vulnerable man beneath the Duke's cold exterior, and he, in turn, became increasingly possessive. He wanted to know where she went, whom she spoke to, what she did with her time when she was not with him. It should have chafed, should have felt like the cage he had built for Catherine. But Beatrice found she craved his jealousy, his need to possess her completely. "Tell me you're mine," he demanded one evening, his hands gripping her waist as he backed her against the wall of the drawing room, his body pressed against hers in a way that made coherent thought difficult. "Tell me that no other man will ever have you like this." "I'm yours," she gasped, her fingers digging into his shoulders. "Only yours, Edmund. No one else even exists when I'm with you." "Good," he growled, and kissed her with a ferocity that left her breathless and trembling. "Because if I ever saw you with another man, if I ever thought you had given to someone else what you give to me, I would destroy him. I would ruin him so completely he would wish he had never been born." She should have been frightened by the violence in his voice, by the possessiveness that bordered on obsession. But instead, she felt a rush of exhilaration, a sense of power in knowing she could drive this controlled, powerful man to such extremes of emotion. "There will never be anyone else," she promised, and meant it with every fiber of her being. It was in the 6th month of their affair that everything changed. Beatrice attended a ball at the Marlborough residence, one of those glittering events where society gathered to see and be seen. She had not expected the Duke to be there. He had mentioned business that would keep him in the country. But there he was, standing near the windows with a group of gentlemen, his face that familiar mask of aristocratic indifference. Their eyes met across the crowded ballroom, and she saw something flash in his gaze. Heat, possession, warning. She understood immediately. He wanted her, but they couldn't acknowledge each other here, not in a way that would raise suspicions. She turned away, accepting an invitation to dance from Lord Pemberton, a harmless young lordling who bored her with talk of his hunting dogs. But as they moved through the steps of the quadrille, she felt eyes on her back, felt the weight of the Duke's stare like a physical touch. When the dance ended, she made her excuses and sought the relative privacy of the terrace, needing air and space to collect herself. The night was warm for autumn, and the gardens beyond the terrace were illuminated by paper lanterns strung through the trees. She had been there perhaps 5 minutes when she sensed, rather than heard, someone approach. She turned to find the Duke standing in the shadows, his face unreadable in the darkness. "You should not be here alone," he said quietly. "It is not proper." "Neither is this conversation," she pointed out, moving closer, despite the risk of discovery. "Yet, here we are." His jaw tightened. "I saw you dancing with Pemberton. He was looking at you with too much interest." "He was being polite," Beatrice said, surprised by the jealousy in his tone. "Edmund, you cannot be jealous of every man who speaks to me. We are not acknowledged. You have no claim on me that society recognizes." "I have every claim," he said fiercely, closing the distance between them in 2 strides. "You are mine, Beatrice. Mine in ways that matter far more than any legal document or social recognition." "Keep your voice down," she hissed, glancing nervously at the ballroom doors. "If someone hears you, let them hear," he said recklessly, and she realized with shock that he was not entirely sober. There was a wildness in his eyes she had never seen before, a desperation that frightened and thrilled her in equal measure. "Let them all know that you belong to me, that I would burn down this entire city before I let another man touch you. Edmund, please." "Do you know what it is like," he continued, as if she hadn't spoken, "to watch you smile at other men, to see you dance in their arms when all I want is to claim you publicly, to announce to everyone that you are mine? I am going mad with it, Beatrice. This secrecy, this pretense. I want—" He broke off, running his hands through his hair in a gesture of frustration. "I want what I cannot have. I want you as my wife, not my mistress. I want to wake beside you every morning and fall asleep with you every night. I want the world to know that you are the only woman who has ever mattered to me." Beatrice felt her heart constrict. "You have a wife," she said gently. "Catherine." "Catherine means nothing to me," he said harshly. "She never did. Our marriage was a transaction, nothing more. But you, Beatrice, you have become essential to me in a way I never anticipated. You have become the thing I think about when I wake, and the last thought before I sleep. And it is killing me to keep you at arm's length." She reached for him, her hand finding his in the darkness. "What are you saying, Edmund?" "I'm saying that I want to be free of her," he said quietly. "I want to divorce Catherine and marry you. I want you to be my duchess, not my secret." The words hung between them, dangerous and intoxicating. Beatrice felt her breath catch. "The scandal would be enormous," she said. "Your reputation, your standing in society." "I don't care," he said fiercely. "I have money enough to weather any scandal, power enough to force society to accept whatever I choose to do. And I choose you, Beatrice. I choose you over propriety, over reputation, over everything." Before she could respond, voices drifted from the ballroom, people coming out to the terrace for air. The Duke cursed under his breath and released her hand, stepping back into the shadows. "We will speak of this later," he murmured. "Come to Curzon Street tomorrow. 2 o'clock. We need to discuss this properly." Then he was gone, melting into the darkness, leaving Beatrice trembling on the terrace with his words echoing in her mind. Divorce. Marriage. A future she had never dared to imagine. She returned to the ballroom in a daze, went through the motions of socializing, of dancing, of being the perfect, unremarkable young lady. But inside, Her mind was racing. Could he really do it? Could he divorce Catherine and make Beatrice his duchess? The scandal would be unprecedented. Society would turn its back on them. They would be ostracized, whispered about, forever marked by the taint of divorce. But they would be together, truly together, not hiding in the shadows, but standing side by side in the light. The thought filled her with a wild, terrifying hope. She barely slept that night, and by the time 2 o'clock arrived the next day, she was wound so tight she thought she might shatter. She arrived at the Curzon Street house to find the Duke already there, pacing the drawing room like a caged predator. He turned when she entered, and the look on his face took her breath away. It was raw, unguarded, everything he usually kept hidden behind that aristocratic mask. "I meant what I said last night," he told her without preamble. "I want to divorce Catherine and marry you. I have consulted with my solicitors. It can be done, though it will take time and considerable expense. But it can be done." Beatrice sank onto the settee, her legs suddenly weak. "Edmund, the consequences." "I know the consequences," he said, coming to kneel before her, taking her hands in his. "We will be social pariahs for a time. The Queen will disapprove. Half of society will cut us. But we will survive it, Beatrice, together. And eventually, people will accept it, because they will have no choice. I am too powerful, too wealthy for them to ignore forever." "And Catherine?" Beatrice asked quietly. "What will become of her?" His face hardened. "She will be provided for financially, as is required by law. But she will remain at Blackwood Manor for the rest of her days, unless she chooses to leave England entirely. I will not have her in society, spreading poison about us." It was cruel, vindictive, everything Catherine deserved and more. And yet Beatrice felt a flicker of guilt for the woman who would bear the full weight of society's censure while they built their new life together. "You're hesitating," the Duke said, searching her face. "Why? I thought this was what you wanted." "It is," Beatrice said. "God help me, Edmund. It is. But I need you to be certain. I need you to be sure this is not just revenge against Catherine speaking. That you're not trying to replace her with me out of spite." He was silent for a moment, his gray eyes boring into hers. 6 months ago, he said finally, I would have told you that revenge was exactly what this was. That I wanted to hurt Catherine by replacing her with someone better, someone who actually valued what I could offer. But that was before I knew you, Beatrice. Before I understood that what we have is not about her at all. He raised one of her hands to his lips, pressing a kiss to her palm. "I love you," he said simply. "I did not want to. I did not mean to. But you have become so entwined with my very existence that I cannot imagine a future without you in it. That is not revenge. That is not spite. That is simply the truth." Beatrice felt tears prick her eyes. "I love you too," she whispered. "I have loved you since that first night at your manor, when you looked at me with such fury and such pain, and I realized you were not the cold man everyone believed you to be." He rose and pulled her to her feet, gathering her into his arms. "Then say yes," he murmured against her hair. "Say you will marry me. Say you will be my duchess, and my partner, and the mother of my children. Say you will stand with me against whatever scandal comes." "Yes," she said, the word breaking free like a dam bursting. "Yes, Edmund. Yes. I will marry you. I will be yours in every way that matters." His kiss was searing, claiming, a brand that marked her as his forever. And as Beatrice gave herself over to the heat of it, she understood that they had come full circle. She had brought him news of betrayal that night in the rain, had set his revenge in motion against his faithless wife. But in doing so, she had also set in motion her own transformation, from invisible young woman to the future Duchess of Blackwood. The scandal, when it broke, was everything they had anticipated, and worse. The Duke filed for divorce on the grounds of adultery, presenting evidence that Lord Hadley had fled to the continent to avoid the scandal. Catherine fought it at first, claiming the Duke had driven her to infidelity with his own affairs, but the weight of evidence against her was insurmountable. Society turned on them with a viciousness that shocked even Beatrice. Invitations dried up. Former friends cut them dead in the street. The gossip was relentless, cruel, designed to wound. They called her a schemer, a seductress who had stolen another woman's husband. They called him a monster who had destroyed his wife for the sake of his mistress. But through it all, they had each other. The Duke weathered the storm with the same icy control he brought to everything, using his considerable influence to ensure that those who depended on his patronage remained at least outwardly polite. And Beatrice discovered a strength she had not known she possessed, holding her head high even as society matrons whispered behind their fans. The divorce was finalized on a cold February morning, exactly 11 months after that night, when Beatrice had arrived at Blackwood Manor in the rain. Catherine was granted a generous settlement and took herself off to the continent, where she could live quietly without the constant reminder of her disgrace. The Duke and Beatrice were married 3 weeks later in a small, private ceremony, attended only by the Duke's solicitor and Grimsby as witnesses. There was no grand society wedding, no announcement in the papers. Just two people exchanging vows before God and promising to love each other through whatever storms lay ahead. On their wedding night, as Beatrice stood in the bedroom of Blackwood Manor, now truly hers, wearing a nightgown of ivory silk and waiting for her husband, she thought back to that rainy evening when she had first crossed this threshold. She had been so uncertain then, so afraid of what she was setting in motion. The Duke entered the room, still dressed in his wedding suit, and stopped when he saw her. "What are you thinking about?" he asked softly, coming to stand before her. "About the night I came here," she said, reaching up to loosen his cravat. "About how I never imagined it would lead to this." "Regrets?" he asked, his hand settling on her waist. "None," she said firmly. "Not a single one. We paid for this, Edmund. We paid in scandal and social standing and the respect of people whose opinions we should never have cared about in the first place. But we got each other, and that was worth everything." He kissed her then, gentle and reverent, so different from the hungry claiming of their early encounters. This was not a mistress and her lover stealing forbidden moments. This was husband and wife, Duke and Duchess, two people who had fought for the right to be together and won. "I will spend the rest of my life," he murmured against her lips, "making sure you never regret choosing me, making sure you know that you are treasured and valued and loved beyond measure." "I know," she said, smiling up at him. "I've always known." Years later, when society had grudgingly accepted them back into the fold and the scandal had faded to a distant memory, when they had children running through the halls of Blackwood Manor and a life built on mutual respect and fierce love, Beatrice would sometimes think back to that night in the rain, the night she had whispered to the Duke that his wife was betraying him, the night she had set revenge in motion. She never told anyone, not even Edmund, that she had not overheard Catherine and Lord Hadley's conversation by accident, that she had been following the Duchess for weeks, watching and waiting for proof of the affair she suspected, that she had carefully planned her dramatic arrival at Blackwood Manor, knowing exactly what it would do to the Duke's pride and his heart. Some secrets were meant to be kept. Some acts of calculated vengeance were best left unexamined, because the truth was that Beatrice had wanted Edmund Blackwood from the moment she saw him, and she had been willing to do whatever it took to have him. She had destroyed a marriage, ruined a woman, engineered a scandal that had shaken society to its foundations, and she would do it all again, without hesitation, because it had brought her here, to this man, this life, this fierce and perfect love. Revenge, Beatrice had learned, was not always about punishing those who wronged you. Sometimes it was about taking what you wanted and refusing to apologize for the wreckage left behind. Sometimes it was about whispering the right words at the right moment and watching the world rearrange itself according to your desires. She had whispered to the Duke that night in the rain, and what he did, what they did together, had changed everything. Some might call it evil. Others might call it justice. But Beatrice called it love, dark and possessive and absolutely unrepentant. And in the end, that was all that mattered.